I sought out wisdom. I sought out experience. And in this category in particular, I found the shelves pretty empty when I talked to other men. I didn't have the kind of men around me who offered, the kind of sage understanding, the caring, the thoughtfulness, the intentionality that I needed. What I mostly found was, I thought, comic kind of caricatures of how a father should act in regards to young men. And I remember men telling me about sharpening their knife when the boy showed up to pick up their daughter, or handing them a bullet and asking them to carry it around and then tell them why later, or cleaning their gun. And I remember the 16-year-old boy I was. And if you threatened or challenged me, that was a massive mistake in regards to your daughter. That would not play well with me at all. And not only did I think it was a bad strategy, I thought it just lacked all the integrity of the way God would have us engage a young man in this precious opportunity, um, in this moment of encountering our daughters. And what should I do? How should I handle that?
Sons, welcome back to the Being Sons podcast. So what do you do as a father when you've got a daughter entering into the dating season and there are young suitors who are beginning to find your daughter attractive and they want to spend more time with her? Well, that's a conversation that personally I really needed to have, and I needed somebody like my good friend Brian Schroller who had experience and wisdom. That's the voice of Brian Schroller that you just heard. What we'd like to do in this conversation is propose to you that this is not just a season that is meant to put you on the defense for your daughter. While it is first and foremost an opportunity for you to protect your daughter, it's also a rare opportunity for you to go on the offensive and for you to offer a young man an invitation and a clear vision of manhood that hopefully he's going to carry with him, not only in that date with your daughter, but also for the rest of his life. Whether you have daughters or sons, whether they're coming of age or not yet, this conversation is going to leave you with an elevated vision of how you can use this season that we often dread and joke about to actually bring some much needed fathering and strength into the world. I'm so glad you could join Brian and I as we walk and talk about fathering your daughter's date on the tried and true road to being sons. Hey, sons, welcome back to the Being Sons podcast. I am your host, Jay Heck, and I am here with an amazingly good friend of mine, Brian Schroller. And Brian and I, along with several other men, have had the privilege of hosting boot camps now since 2008. You and I met at a boot camp in Colorado in 2006, and 2 years later, we clearly felt like God had something for us to do in the lives of other men down here in San Antonio. And since our introduction, we've had the opportunity to host, I think we're going to be on our 23rd or our 24th boot camp coming up here in January.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Brian, you are the father of 6, 2 sons, 4 daughters. Wow. I'm often amazed just thinking about that. And you're also one of the most joyful family men that I know. You're able to handle a good bit of stress. And when I have only 2, at times I just wonder, what is his secret? One of them surely is your beautiful wife, Kate, who's also just immensely designed for that calling. So Brian Schroller, good friend, welcome to the Being Sons podcast.
Thanks. Great to be here, Jay.
Yeah. The reason for our conversation here today is what do you do as a man when you've got a daughter who is entering into the dating age and there are young suitors who find your daughter attractive and they want to spend more time with her? How do you handle that? Because there are some good ways to handle that and there are some bad ways to handle that. And you have been speaking. I've heard you for years, as you also share in one of the other sessions that we offer during those boot camps, and that's on the beauty. It's one of the most confusing things that we as men deal with, and yet it's one of the greatest, most powerful, and profound gifts that God gives to us to help us find the truth about who we are, about who He is, and about females. So anyway, when I was faced or confronted with the reality that my daughter was actually beginning to see guys, and knowing that guys actually had been seeing her for years, I'm really thankful that she's been more attracted to horses than boys for a while. That's been so kind of God. But of late, she has been purchasing makeup and spending time with friends and learning how to put that on, and she's been accentuating her beauty, which has been phenomenal to see her embracing her beauty, and also a bit terrifying as well. And so when I heard that she had a guy that wanted to take her out here recently, it was just this last weekend, I said, okay, God, I really want to do this well with my daughter's heart and with this young man. So I need you to father me in this. And you came to mind, no surprise at all. And so I called you up, texted you, and we ended up having a conversation. And I said, Brian, walk me through this. What's your story? Tell me a bit about your successes and failures in this arena. And so that as we had that conversation, I was so deeply encouraged. And what I knew to be true, you said, you've got this. But here's how I did it. And it was really encouraging, really empowering. And so I said, you know what, we really need to have a conversation, because there's some dads out there that are probably rightly terrified of this, because all of us were young men at one point. And I think I would not want my daughter to date or go out on a date with 16 or 17-year-old me. How about you?
That's probably our deepest fear.
Yeah,
that the man that we were at that age is the man that's crawling into the front seat of a car with her headed off on a date.
Yes. All right. So Brian, drop some wisdom here, because you've done this with a couple of girls. Yeah. You've had with a couple of your daughters. You've had some successes with that, and certainly what you shared with me was of great benefit to me. So anyway, we'll just start off there.
Yeah, and I would just say, in regards to her, the fair species, the fair gender of the species, we're all novices. We're all apprentices. We're all scared to death. We're all trying to figure it out. And ironically, I wasn't as terrified of having a little girl as I was having a son. I knew what having a son would require of me, and I didn't feel prepared. And having little girls, there was a portion of their life and an understanding of who they were that I could, in my mind, turn over to a very capable wife. And it wasn't until they started to reach the age of being young women that they started to terrify me like every other woman I'd encountered in my life.
Yeah.
And then I became I think what I felt God told me at one point is, I'm an inverse Abraham. I'm a son of many fathers. And I sought out wisdom. I sought out experience. And in this category in particular, I found the shelves pretty empty when I talked to other men. I didn't have the kind of men around me who offered, the kind of sage understanding, the caring, the thoughtfulness, the intentionality that I needed. What I mostly found was, I thought, comic kind of caricatures of how a father should act in regards to young men. And I remember men telling me about sharpening their knife when the boy showed up to pick up their daughter, or handing them a bullet and asking them to carry it around and then tell them why later, or cleaning their gun.
Right.
And I remember the 16-year-old boy I was, And if you threatened or challenged me, that was a massive mistake in regards to your daughter.
Mm.
That would not play well with me at all. And not only did I think it was a bad strategy, I thought it just lacked all the integrity of the way God would have us engage a young man in this precious opportunity, um, in this moment of encountering our daughters. And what should I do? How should I handle that? And I came across a book called Interviewing Your Daughter's Date. And I've gone back and looked at it. It's a little rigid for the way I see
Mm-hmm.
my identity as a Christian man now,
Yeah.
but the tenets of it were really profound. And so I built a structure of how I would engage these young men based on that book. And I'd say the philosophy is I'm going to treat you as a man. I'm going to call you up into the understanding of what it means to be a man in regards to her. And I'm probably going to speak to you as a man in this vulnerable moment and in this sensitive category in a way that no other man's ever engaged you. And when I understood that, and we can walk through process if you want, but when I understood the philosophy behind it, that I had an opportunity, a moment to engage a young man and speak into his life and invite him up, woo him into an understanding of what it meant to be a man as God intended. I went from being uncomfortable with the prospect to being incredibly excited
Mm-hmm.
for the next young man to show up.
Mm-hmm.
And that was kind of my personal journey as a father. I was no longer seeing an 8-handed octopus in a Letterman's jacket waiting to devour my daughter. And I saw it as a young man with the privilege of maybe changing the course of his life in regards to women through this simple conversation I could have as he wanted to take my daughter on a date.
Mm-hmm. That's really good. I have a good friend who handed me a piece of paper recently, and it was more of a joke than anything, but it was like a
Mm-hmm.
5-page uh, application to to
Mm-hmm.
date my daughter, and it had questions on it
Yeah.
like, "Do you own a van?" Yeah, and it's funny, and your mind really does play tricks on you when you are
Mm-hmm.
entrusting another
Mm-hmm.
man with the care of
Mm-hmm.
the most precious,
Mm-hmm.
what seems like the most vulnerable and possibly naive thing that has
Mm-hmm.
been under your care for years. And I had
Yeah.
actually just gotten new sights put on my 9mm that day. And I got to tell you, I was thinking about him the whole day.
It's funny. I think your own story really comes to bear.
Mm-hmm.
So, not only was I thinking of the 16-year-old I was, but I was also thinking about the vulnerability and the exposure that I was raised in, and this idea that there was no one there to protect me. So, my Enneagram 8, my fierceness as a father, my insecurity and fear around that for much of my life as a father until I had some better understanding of sonship and the role that God appointed me to was guided by fear and control.
Mm-hmm.
And so the elements of fear and control, how dare you? I'm going to put a barricade between. I'm going to fill sandbags and surround my house to keep the enemies out, most
Mm-hmm.
principally a hormone raging 16 or 17-year-old boy. But I'm here to protect, and I'll do anything. I'll lay my life down. And maybe a false nobility expression of that, that
Mm-hmm.
I would do anything to protect her. And how dare you? And I had to really understand that, again, that challenging and taking on of a young man at an age when he's trying to assert and step into something that's actually really holy
Mm-hmm.
and very rarely actually dealt with in a way that I think would help move him in the direction of God's intention. This is a precious, precious moment. And it needs to be more about not just operating out of my fear and need for control, but it needs to be more about making my daughter feel protected and honored, and speaking into a man in a way that will make him an honorer and a protector of not only my daughter, but maybe the rest of the women he encounters in his life.
Mhm. Okay. So walk us through what you walked me through. Now, I've heard this many, many times, but it was
Yeah,
amazing to get a refresher, right? And so
yeah,
what I'm hoping is that this conversation is something that maybe, for you sons who are listening, this may not be exactly the time that you're going to need to hear this, but you're going to be deeply encouraged to know that there is a strategy out there where you can do something really beautiful, very holy, very
yeah.
intentional, and you're going to have this recording in your back pocket when you need it. And you're going to be able to share that with other men as well. So, all right, drop some wisdom.
So the first thing I want to do is know who he is, and there are particular questions about that. So tell me about yourself. How do you spend your time? What are you interested in? And I'm really fact finding for the kind of man he is. I want to know where he spends his energy, where he devotes his time. I want to know if he has good friendships, because a young man who doesn't have good friendships or isn't involved in activities that occupy his time has a strong tendency to make my daughter the very center of their life.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to know that he has, contextually life beyond the girl that he's coming to pick up on a date.
Mm-hmm.
I want to understand his relationship with his father. I want to know what it's like, what he thinks of his dad. Is his dad someone he's challenged by, that he likes to take on? Because that'll very much affect the way he looks at me. Is his father a nurturer? Has he been present? Has he been involved? But I want to know the man he is. So I'm asking him questions about his life, how he spends his energy and time, what he's passionate and interested in, what are his plans beyond school. Has he thought about what he thinks he'd like his life to look like? So I'm elevating the conversation even in an intro by getting to know him.
And
So
you're talking to him like a man.
absolutely. I'm asking him questions probably no one's asked him before, and I'm not doing it in a condescending way. I'm doing it in a more peer-to-peer way.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about who you are as a man. I'm not using that language, but I'm very much using that tone. I'm elevating him as I'm getting to know him to a different conversation and a different interpretation of who he is.
Mm-hmm.
And just that is precious.
Mm-hmm.
It's just precious to watch him, and being very comfortable with silence. If you've asked people a question they've never been asked, don't be surprised if they can't answer it very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all okay.
Mm-hmm.
So we have this conversation and about who he is as a man. And then I ask him about his life and proximity to my daughter.
Mm-hmm.
How do you know her? Where did you meet her? What made you decide to ask her out? And that's when the question starts to get a little more uncomfortable for him. And what I likely get is the same response you'd get in the youth group, which is neat Christian girl, sweet spirit about her, really smart. We have mutual friends. We go to the same Bible study, youth thing, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
which are all true. Those things are not untrue. And then I think kind of the fulcrum of the conversation is, and I said, and yeah, but those eyes, right? Those blue eyes and that tan skin and that figure of hers, right? You've noticed that as well, correct? And there's this awkward, like, is he tricking me? Is he trying to trap me? Like, what's he? And I let him suffer, I guess, a moment, but then it's quickly, listen, you're a man of God, but you're a man. And God wired you. You're wired in your creation to notice her form, to notice her beauty. And you know what else? She's wired to notice yours in the same way. And while that's natural that you would notice that and acknowledge it, and if you weren't able to acknowledge that, we would probably need to have a different discussion because you wouldn't be being honest with me.
Mm-hmm.
But you've noticed that and she's noticed that. because you were created to notice that. But God was also really clear in terms of his intentions about how that was supposed to be preserved and protected for the sake of the one that I'll hand her over to one day.
Mhm.
And so it kind of goes from a very awkward to maybe an invitation into a different understanding. And I tell him, as protector and preserver of my daughter's heart and her body and her mind, that means that I have to place myself in the way of things that would endanger that. So opening her car door, opening a door, or maybe some of the base level things I do in a way to honor and protect her. But if we're in a situation where there's danger, I place myself between her and the danger. Even if there's inappropriate conversation going on, I'm going to make the conversation stop or I'm going to remove her. But at all times, I'm going to place myself in between whatever might endanger her and me. And that also goes to her sexuality, her body. I'm supposed to protect that. I'm supposed to preserve her mind. I'm supposed to preserve her body. And I take that as a really holy and privileged responsibility that I get to protect and preserve,
Mm-hmm.
so that one day when I do hand her over to a man, I can do it with clear eyes and confidence that I've done everything God's asked of me in terms of protecting and preserving that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You understand that. You see how that's so important. I'm getting buy-in and buy-in. And then I say, so for the sake of this night, I won't be there for dinner and the movie or wherever you're going, but I need you to do something for me. I need you to consider taking on the responsibility that I, as a man, would take if I were with her. Do you think you could take on that responsibility and be the man I would be in that situation and protect her physically, emotionally, spiritually, mentally? You think you could do that for me? Would you be willing to take on that role in the times that you're alone with her on a date like this? And of course, there's always a yes. And the accuser says, well, he's just telling you what you want to hear. But my experience has been that there's something transactional and something really powerful that happens in the moment. When you look at a man's eyes and treat him as a man and call him up into manhood in a way he never has been before, something happens, something magical happens.
Mm-hmm.
God intervenes in a way, the way that he does when we acknowledge something holy about another person, and in particular, a young man.
Mm-hmm. You know, my kids, my son who's now off to college, and my daughter, Bosley, who's now a senior, over the course of the years meeting their friends, I have been so aware of my desire to be a
Mm-hmm.
father wherever I can to any
Mm-hmm.
of their friends. Please come
Mm-hmm.
over to our house. Please
Yeah.
spend time over here.
Mm-hmm.
And this is it's a joy to be able to do this to a young man. And with my son's friends, you know, whenever we could, we would get together and have little conversations like this. But yeah, I'm hearing what you're saying. And what I also love about this, Brian, is that there is the caricature father who is meeting this young man, and they're cleaning their gun or they're
Mm-hmm.
doing something like that. And the purpose of that is to assert authority and
Mm-hmm.
to intimidate. But the reality is that you're taking this different approach, which is in general, in communication skills, to get training. If you're asking the questions in a conversation, you are in control of that conversation. It's not the person who's talking,
Completely.
it's the person who's asking the questions.
Mm-hmm.
And so just looking at the flow of this conversation with this young man, you are asserting your authority, but you're doing it kindly, respectfully, with a lot of dignity,
Mm-hmm.
by asking questions. Who are you?
Mm-hmm.
Tell me the story. How do you know my daughter? What do
Mm-hmm.
you like about my daughter? And then it shifts a little bit, because once you have made the intro that basically this young man has eyes for your daughter, and that's a healthy thing. This is a moment where you basically you drop some truth. You drop some knowledge
Mhm.
that's probably
Mhm.
unfamiliar to him. You're preaching, you're teaching in season and out of season. And then you go
Mhm.
back to asking questions. In light of what I just said, can I trust you with this? Would you would you stand in my proxy for her? Would you
Mhm.
put yourself in it? So you're really in control of this entire conversation, but never putting him on the defensive where he's on his heels or he's feeling threatened by you.
Yeah.
And what I love about that, and one of the reasons that I really felt like you are such a wise voice in this, is that I don't want that young man to not like me at all. It's also part of how I protect my daughter. And you mentioned that. Um, and two scriptures come to mind when I think about this in your approach is train up a child in the way that he should go, and when he's older, they won't depart from it. It's not just my son and my daughter, where we have the opportunity to train another young man or another young woman. That's what we should do. We are
Mm.
hopefully saving his life. And the other is without a vision, the people perish. And
Mm.
without a vision of authentic masculinity or what this relationship is meant to look like between you and any young woman in the future, um, you're gonna miss the mark. You're gonna miss the gold
Mm.
for what God has in store for you in this. So anyway, that's phenomenal. So my question for you is, like, how did your okay? You've got stories. Okay, that's what you've learned. But with your daughter Hannah, and your next older
Mm.
one is Sarah, like, how did they
Mhm.
respond to your decision to do that? Were they on board with it? How did they feel about it beforehand and afterward?
Well, luckily, we made some mistakes with our son, who was a few years before them. So they're all the first three are 3 years apart each. And with our son, we took the tact of let's keep the idea of a girlfriend as far away from us as possible. Let's almost pretend like it's not happening. Let's keep distance. We didn't invite her to our
Mm,
house for dinner.
right.
We didn't spend time with her. We didn't get to know her. We almost wanted to pretend like she didn't exist. And that was an incredible mistake. And so the different tactic with this was we started telling our girls at 12 and 13, not till 16 in a group environment and not till older on your own, we will have this conversation with these men when they show up. So we had water dripped the concept. And of course, there was pushback and what are you up to? And are you going to embarrass me?
Mm-hmm.
Was the initial response.
Mm-hmm.
Once my wife understood and really felt, I think, protected and honored that I was willing to step into that awkward situation with these young men for the sake of her daughters. Once she was fully on board and we were united front in this, then there really wasn't any conversation about it. We had decided this is the way this will go.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think initially there was uncomfortableness about what's going to happen in that conversation. And then if you want me to move on to the what they found out through that was, and what we've heard, maybe not when they were 17, but when they were 21 and 23 in letters and in conversations, they felt protected, they felt honored, they felt cared for, they felt loved.
Mm-hmm.
And as a parent, you don't hear those kinds of words from your kids on a daily basis, maybe not even on an annual basis, hopefully a little bit of that on Father's Day.
Mm-hmm.
But you have these moments in a poem they wrote or conversation you had, or in that precious moment when they decide they want to really share their heart, where you hear that the way you love them and protected them preserve them, and that they see the connection between those two things.
Mm-hmm.
It's not we shouldn't expect that all of our most noble movement in the direction of caring for them is going to be understood or respected in the moment. But in this case, they got very comfortable with complying with this preliminary conversation before they went on dates, much sooner maybe than I would have even expected.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, what about the young men?
So the young men I see all their faces. There was only 7 or 8 of them.
Mm-hmm.
One of them ended up marrying my daughter, Hannah. But I see all their faces and I remember the conversations almost like they were yesterday. And they were just precious. I mean, it's almost emotional for me to think about getting an opportunity to talk to them. Their wide eyes, their leaning in, their uncomfortableness of moving into sitting up a little straighter in their chair as we talked. The things we heard from their parents. What did you tell my son?
Mm-hmm.
He came home and wrote all these notes down and said one day when he has a daughter, he's going to do the same exact thing when a boy comes to ask her out. Um, one parent told us that after it ended up where our daughter and his son didn't continue dating, um, he had told his father, "I'm not sure if Sarah and I are going to go out ever again, but I would love to hang out with her dad some more."
Mm-hmm.
So real man-to-man connection had happened in a way that something transformative occurred in those young men. Now, because of the worlds that most of us run in, I don't know that this tack would work on or they would respond in this way. The average young man,
Mm-hmm.
but for a young man who's been raised in a family where there's some element of faith or some understanding of who they are,
Mm-hmm.
this lands really beautifully. And I'd like to believe, and I feel like spiritually God has allowed me to believe the fact that the way they've cared for women beyond my daughter, and maybe even the way they treat their wives, has been affected by a simple conversation that we had before he took my daughter out the first time.
Mm-hmm. Mm. And hopefully there was a shift that
Yeah.
uh, a, a young man in the course of a 30-minute interaction with you
Hmm.
goes
Hmm.
from his primary goal is how do I have a good time and in some way seek validation through this
Hmm.
girl to holy smokes, I
Yeah.
hopefully throughout the date he's actually thinking, and I think it's probably likely that throughout the date he's actually thinking more about you
Uh-huh.
and what you said, and he's looking at her in a
Hmm.
very different light than he was prior to that. Yeah.
Hmm. I
Yeah.
remember, times in career and in life when someone trusted me, really trusted me, not in a superficial way, but bestowed responsibility on me, bestowed honor as they gave me responsibility and trusted me, where I rose to the occasion, where I was a different man from that point forward because they earnestly looked me in the eye, saw something in me, and expected something grander from me in the way I behave going forward.
Mm-hmm.
It materially moved me. And I think that's the case in this situation. I've had some cynical fathers say, yeah, we all know how to say whatever the dad needs us to say, and we're all going to nod our heads and then get back to the agenda of getting what we can get. But I just don't think that's true. I think that's very cynical, and I think if your intentions and your heart are right, you really can change not only the course of that date that evening
Mm-hmm.
or their initial relationship, but maybe the course of their life.
Mm. So what about you? Because you went against the grain to do things in a
Yeah,
different way. You heard a lot of
yeah.
other advice, which may have
Mhm.
sounded sound and helpful at the time. But what was the impact on you after having had this conversation? Because the first one or two, maybe a couple of them, maybe a kid
Mhm.
walks in the door and
Yeah.
you find yourself intimidated by it.
Mm.
You know, your voice may be just as shaky as his is potentially. And I would imagine that for some fathers, this is a very scary thing to
Mm.
think about. So tell
Mm.
me, Brian, what was the effect on you personally and in terms of your relationship with God having
Mhm.
courageously entered into this conversation?
Yeah, and like all aspects of being a man, and maybe in particular in this area, we all feel like gangly teenagers. We all feel like amateurs. We all feel like novices, and in many ways we are. But when call is given and accepted, when you step into strength, when you take on what you believe God has spelled out, when you feel the trueness of this being right, and even if it's uncomfortable, I'm going to claim it and I'm going to step into that gap. Almost from the moment that you say, "Send me," I accept this responsibility. Strength starts to rise. Confirmation is pinging all over the inside of me. So it went from what in the heck do I do? I have no skills and no experience to I can't wait. I feel like I'm doing something. I'm stepping into some void that very few men have stepped into, or very few men have been privileged with the understanding of. And I'm getting to engage, protect, honor, elevate. Just the adjectives that come to my mind when I think about this are just overwhelming. It's an empowerment. It's a strengthening. It's stepping out of passivity into strength. It's going from playing defense to playing offense. It's all of that kind of terminology you could think of. But I rise. I feel a rise inside of me, emotionally, physically, and every other way.
What about Kate?
My precious wife. She's one of 6 girls. She had a father who was very, very uninvolved, hunter, fisherman, a good guy, owned a business, but hunter, fisher, not super involved with his girls, maybe in the way that I am. Loves them, but just a very different relationship. His wife, my wife's mom, died when his youngest daughter was 10 and his eldest daughter was 18. My wife was the 10-year-old. And so there were 6 girls without a super present father and without a mom in the most formative years of their life. So any movement toward our daughters and strength is both unfamiliar and a little bit uncomfortable and unsure, and also hugely confirming and rescuing for her. What I hear in every woman I've talked to about this, including my wife, is, oh my gosh, if my father, I wish I'd had someone raising me who would have cared enough to step into. And I've heard from many other moms when my wife has told them about this, will you come do this for my daughter? Even though there's a husband in the house, I would love someone to do that for her. And obviously my response is, well, let me talk to your husband. But I think anytime someone steps up into the gap where most people don't step into, and they step into a place of honor and dignity and elevating relationship through the way you care for someone, there's many people standing around in line waiting. I remember our house church, and a couple of times God called me to pray a blessing over a young man with a particularly fractured relationship with his dad. And after the church service would end, if I turned around very quickly, there would be 3 or 4 other young men standing at my elbows, hungry for someone else to speak to him as a man. And that's the transactional thing that happens in that conversation. We get to do that. And are they repelled by that? Are they uncomfortable with that? Hell no. They're desperate for it in the same way we're desperate for it.
Right. And in the age that we're living in, where there's so much confusion about gender, much confusion about gender is rooted in the fact that what is the glory or the dignity of how I'm designed? It's so easy to discard if there's confusion or if there's a lack of dignity about it. And, unfortunately, once if we don't have that vision and we embrace a different vision, which feels more like life, it's quite a battle to come back from that, but not in the least impossible. So I think one of the corollary benefits of having this conversation is that I know that my kids go to a Christian school, And yet that
Mhm.
gender confusion is prevalent
Ugh, yeah.
all through that as well. And so what you're actually doing without even addressing it is you're helping them reorient around a vision of authentic masculinity
Mm,
that
mm.
feels very attractive, very
The
attractive.
false, yeah, the false feminine, the confusion in our culture around gender is a natural reaction to the false masculine.
Hmm.
This didn't happen in a vacuum. Our misunderstanding of who we are as men, our misunderstanding of how to care for her,
Hmm.
to protect her, and we haven't done a particularly better job, maybe a worse job in the church than in the broader culture. But we have an opportunity, conversation by conversation,
Yeah.
not shouting across the social media platforms, but person to person, face to face, to right masculinity and right femininity as you're having a conversation in the flow of the thing that terrifies us most about some boy coming for our daughter.
Right.
Why
Without,
wouldn't we do that?
right, right. The the victory comes not through accusation, but through invitation.
Yeah. You draw a sword on me, I'm going to draw one back.
Yeah.
You pull up alongside me, I'm going to lean in.
Hmm.
Same thing with a young man.
Hmm. Hmm.
So, Jay,
Yeah.
we had a conversation,
Yep.
and you've heard me talk about this at boot camp,
Hmm.
many times. And you called up. What I loved was you're a very capable man. You're capable of talking to young men at the drop of a hat with more intentionality than probably any man I know. But in humility, you called up and said, "Other Father,
Hmm.
I'm stepping into this for the first time, and I know you have some time in the field in this. So would you again tell me about the experience of doing this? Walk me through it."
Hmm.
And then I began praying for courage for you from that moment on, because I know what that feels like to step into that. And I ask you, please call and let me know, text me and let me know, because I knew it would be glorious.
Hmm.
And you contacted me and said, let me just wait till we get into a podcast. Why don't you and I have a conversation about it? And then I'll tell you about it. So I've been waiting patiently for about 48 hours for you to tell me about what I know was a really profound experience. So tell me about your experience of this.
Right. Well, I didn't hear about this upcoming date until about 3 days before, and I was actually out of town. So I came in and I realized, you know what? I haven't really done a lot of prep work with my daughter on this because she's
Uh,
been so infatuated with horses and so busy in that arena. And, there's just, there can be static between a father and a 17-year-old daughter. I mean, they're just, so, teenage girls can be among the most narcissistic beings on the entire planet, and that's actually by God's design. It is a glorious
no
thing.
comment.
Yeah, no comment, no comment. Um, and I'm not saying, of course, that my daughter is among those narcissistic
Of
at
course.
all, right? But when I say narcissistic, I just mean that the world necessarily revolves around them and they don't necessarily see the bigger picture. And so I realized that, okay, whatever I do here is probably not going to be really popular with my
Mhm.
daughter, but I need to do what I need to do. And in the end, she will see that this is actually an act of love. So I had barely seen my daughter after realizing this guy was coming over. So she came home from work and she started taking a shower and getting ready, and that was just an experience knowing my daughter is taking a shower to smell good. She's going to be putting on
Uh,
eyeliner and she's going to be choosing clothes. And why? Because there is an attraction. This is new, right? So I had the choice to either be pissed off about that or to glory and to revel in it, so when she comes down the stairs to be able to say, wow, you look So good. So pretty. And my wife and my daughter are there. We're kind of picking up the house a little bit to make a good impression. And to go to my daughter and say, well, hun, I just want you to know he's going to be here in about an hour, hour and a half. Uh, I need 15 minutes with him alone. And she was like, what? 15 minutes? What? And then from the other room, like my wife was like, what? 15 minutes? And so Bosley goes upstairs, and she's kind of giving me, some friction about that. And I said, hun, that's just a non-negotiable. I said it with a smile on my face. I need 15 minutes with him alone. And she accepted it better than I thought that she would. And then she went upstairs. And then, of course, the wife comes around the corner into the kitchen. 15 minutes? What are you going to do for 15 minutes? Don't you think that's too long? I'm like, actually, hon, I could probably talk to him for hours. 15 minutes is really capping me on this. And I said, that's just the way that it's going to be. And, and she was like, well, okay. So anyway, the time comes, the young man walks through the door. Thankfully he was very presentable looking. He had obviously cleaned up as well. And so I met him, realized that I'd actually seen him before at football games or, other places in the school. But it really was the very first time that I'd met him. So to shake hands with him, and we engaged in pleasantries for about 2 minutes. And my daughter and my wife are like, what is about to happen here? What is about to happen? And I said, well, hey, man, I'd love to talk with you for a couple minutes. Why don't you follow me? And we went into the garage. Now, the garage is a place that actually, at my house, actually looks more like just a manly living room. I've got chairs set up, and it's cleared. I don't, there are some axes and stuff hanging on the wall, but that was not the point to take him into intimidating environment. So I crack open my leaky fridge and I offered him a drink. He took a drink, and, I sat down with a Topo Chico, and I did exactly what you said. And I'm just putting these things in order. It's like, introduce yourself, allow him to introduce himself, ask the question, how do you know my daughter? Ask the question, so what do you like about my daughter? And then allow that to be the ramp into the offering of a vision in a higher vision probably than what he thought he was getting into for this date. So, he likes tennis, and he has activities, he has friends. He's been in my daughter's friend group, around lunch tables for years. And so just, to ask, he's a senior. So what are you thinking about for next year? And he was thinking about A&M. So I just got to share some thoughts with him about that. And he knows my son, who we just dropped him off to school about 3 weeks ago. And so that conversation, that was great. It was a very easy on-ramp to a conversation with him. And so I think that just engaging it in that way, man to man, the nerves begin to settle down. You begin to appreciate this is a good kid, he's a good kid. And he naturally was talking about his family, his mom and his dad. And so that was good. So how do you know my daughter? Well, we've been in a friend group. And this was fun to hear. He said, yeah, well, I actually have really liked your daughter for many years, and we kind of had a little thing going back like freshman year, but I made a terrible mistake because there was this dance and I wanted to take her, but somehow I ended up asking somebody else or something like that. And he says, this is one of the dumbest things I've ever done, and so he's whether he knows it or not, he's earning there's some actual vulnerability. Yeah. He said, when my parents found out that I did that to your daughter, they really disagreed with me. And I was like, wow, okay. Points going up for your parents, points going up for you. And I said, so how do you know my daughter? And he said, well, your daughter, he said, Bosley, she's just not like other girls. I'm like, really? How so? He says, well, she's really pretty, and but she's also super smart, and I really love having conversations with her because she's not like a lot of the other girls who, when he said, I've just come to expect that if a girl's pretty, she's going to be kind of shallow and she just doesn't have much to say. But your daughter's actually really smart, love having conversations with her, and she's really funny. And I said, I'm just so glad that you see that in her, because she's pretty, isn't she? Well, yes, sir. And she's got these deep, deep pressing eyes, right? And he's like, well, yeah, she is. I mean, they're so deep and they're so engaging. And I said, they're one of my favorite features about her. And she's got really good skin, doesn't she? Well, yes, sir, she does. And her body's pretty good, right? I mean, come on, you're a man, right? He's like, yeah, yes, sir. There's more yes, sirs than in an entire military academy, right? In that 15 minutes.
Right.
But to begin talking about that beauty, and how I recognize it,
Mhm.
and that I'm glad you recognize it too. And I said, I'm really glad you also recognize that who she is far, far deeper than what you see on the outside. But that's when that's when I launched into the conversation. And I said, you know what? When God decided to create humanity, there's such a fullness to him that in order for us to so deeply appreciate it and to have eyes to see who he is ultimately, he needed to split us up into a couple of genders. And so he's given you his expression as a man. You bear the masculine image of God. And as such, when you look at my daughter and you recognize her beauty, you're actually bearing the image of God, because the same things that you appreciate about her, he appreciates about her. He wants you to notice these things. And in the same way, she bears the feminine image of God, and she brings something to the world, and she can bring something to a conversation that you'll experience tonight that is absolutely divine. It's a way that she gloriously bears the image of God. And so, we are in the garage, and the garage door's open. And there's people, there's dads, and there's other kids kind of playing in the street. And I said, I'm not going to name his name, but I said, I want you to be aware for the rest of your life that as you look out over the world, the image of God in men around the world is very confusing. Most men are confused, and most men do not rise to the occasion, and they do not live the lives that they were created for, because they simply don't understand how glorious it is to bear the image of God. I said, you can look out over all those boys, over everybody in this neighborhood right here, and manhood is men around the world are confused, and they generally tend to go in one of two directions with their masculinity. One is that they will use their strength to consume, and the other is that they will use their strength to protect. So I want to tell you about my heart for my daughter. From the day that she was born, it has not been an issue for me to constantly die in one way or another for my daughter. It's been my joy to die. Said, my daughter is so smart and so discerning that over the years, she has corrected me. And I have been willing, for her sake and to protect her heart, to actually change who I am. All my decisions, how I approach women, she has made me a better man because I have chosen to guard and to protect her. And then we went into the physical things, like, I would lay down my life for her. And in fact, it was just last week that she and I both went to a range, and we were shooting, my 38 special and 9mm. And there was something really joyful about feeling like I was being equipped to physically protect my daughter, but also equipping her to be able to protect herself in that type of way. And we had a lot of joy doing that. But to physically protect her is something that I've been doing for years. And then to move into the invitation, I am about to entrust you to do on my behalf what I have been doing all my life, gladly and joyfully. So I'm asking you these questions. Will you guard my daughter's heart while you are with her? And he said, yes, sir. I promise I will. Will you guard my daughter's mind in the things that you talk about while I'm not with her and while I'm entrusting her to your care? Yes, sir. I promise I will. Will you guard and protect her body, not only, for her sake, but also, I believe, for your sake and for her husband's sake someday? Will you honor and respect her body? Yes, sir, I will. And I said, and I probably asked a couple of other questions, but there was
Yeah.
a sincerity in it. He's a good young man, and I just kept thinking to myself, God, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. This is a wonderful young man to share this special moment with my daughter. And I really felt confident that he heard me, that he was going to take those things seriously. And I said, well, I want you to have a good time. And he immediately said, sir, what time would you like me to have your daughter home? I was like, that was good. That was good. Well done. Your parents obviously prepped you, to ask that question. I said, well, I'd love to have her home at 10. And he ended up having her home at 9:30, right? 9:30, 9:35. And I thought, wow, did it go really poorly, or did it go well? But she came in the door and smiles, and it was like she comes in the door, and of course she's not going to tell me a whole lot of information, but she walks in and the dog comes, Daisy comes to greet her at the door, and she's like, Daisy, so you can just tell she's happy. And then we ended up on the couch watching something, and I got to have my hands on my daughter in a very healthy way, rubbing her feet or something like that. So there was something, even without any words, what my interpretation of it was that my daughter was coming to me and non-verbally saying, thank you for helping make that a very special, safe night. She felt loved, she felt seen, she felt precious, she felt cared for, I think, by him and by me. And I know that will eventually translate into how she knows her Father in heaven sees her and will guard her and protect her. So it was really good. And then I think another really fun aspect about that was that once they left, and, I took some pictures through the window and through the blinds of the car and them getting in the car, and Heather's like, get away from the window. She's going to hate you for that. Once they left, I started cooking dinner. And she was like, so tell me, how did it go? And as I'm sharing what I felt was a really good report on my 15, it was probably 20 minutes with him. And all this only took 15 or 20 minutes.
Yeah.
She begins tearing up because to know that this young man had noticed my daughter, this young man had a history with my daughter, this young man recognized things about her beauty that weren't just skin deep. And, she's tearing up, and we're both just giddy about it. Now, I recognize that some dads are probably not going to feel as good or as confident when their daughter walks out the door and this guy gets in the car. But, that may be something in my future as well, that some of those conversations didn't go as well. You didn't feel so much at peace, but, all I can do is engage the step that's ahead of me. And that was a good first experience for me and for her, and I think for that young man as well.
Couple points. Heather teared up, I don't think, because this young man thought well of his daughter. I think she teared up because her husband thought well enough of her daughter to engage this young man in a really heroic way. Felt protected, felt loved, felt cared for. And one of the most precious people in her life was cared for in that way.
And I saw the fruit of that because she hugged me. She looked at me like, well done, because she went from not feeling comfortable with that 15 minutes that I said I was going to have with him to, I'm so glad you had that 15 minutes. Now I know so much more about the situation, and then she and I prayed for them, just a quick 2-minute prayer. Lord, we pray for both of them, that you would elevate this whole experience for them. and that you would father them in this. Yeah.
So the other thing that came to mind as you were talking is you left him better than you found him.
Mm.
He is a different and better man from 15 minutes, like you said.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think any father um, doesn't want to protect his daughter. There's not a father around who wouldn't want to preserve her and honor her and maybe elevate the heart of a young man. We just didn't know how to do it until we knew how to do it. The other question, I didn't get into a lot of the details of theology and things that we sometimes get into
Mm-hmm.
when we're talking about male and female and all that, which you did a great job with. But we talk about that a little more. And then I always end with a final question. And I don't think I told you this.
Okay.
The last question is, if you one day are as blessed as me to marry a beautiful, godly woman and have daughters, would you consider thinking about this conversation and maybe committing to having something similar with your daughters when
Mm.
you have daughters one day? It's a simple question, but it's transactional. I'm not thinking this was an okay conversation. I'm not just being invited into a different level of understanding of who I am. I'm taking on the heart and thought of a father that I might one day be.
Mm.
I'm crossing across a threshold into the mindset of I'm now a father. In my mind, I'm now a father and a man. Will I do this also? Yes, I will do this.
Mm.
And like I said, one young man went home and took all these notes and told his parents he was going to do that one day. But I think that's an important question too. And apologize for not. That's part of the process as well.
Oh,
But
that's great. That's
that's a
great.
good one.
So, I mean, if I end up seeing this young man again, the conversation will evolve, of
Oh,
course.
great.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So, another thing is that if you're listening to this conversation and you don't have a daughter or actually a son entering into the dating world is something that seems like it's far closer on your radar. Schroller, this applies to sons as well.
Uh,
You got to sit your son down. You have to sit
mm,
your son down, and you have to share
mm,
almost the same conversation with him. You already know him,
yeah.
right? But
Mm,
so, son, how do you know this girl? Why are you wanting to go out with her?
mm,
She's pretty hot, right? Well, tell me about her eyes. Tell me about her body. Well, what? I'm not
uh,
interested in that. Oh, come on, come on, come on, come on. Tell me, tell me what attracts you to her, and then you just go into that conversation with him. And what's beautiful is you can actually go deeper, without
mhm,
fear of assaulting somebody that doesn't live under your own roof with too much information, and you can continue having an ongoing conversation with them.
yeah.
But I clearly had this conversation with Bear as well over an extended period of time, and
Yeah.
without what I was able to share in 15 minutes, there is no son that is equipped to go on a date. They have no right going on a date.
Mhm,
Or they have no security going on a date and getting out of it what they should without having a father figure sit down with them and have that conversation about the
mm,
differences in masculinity and femininity and how you bear the image of God and how to express that fully and rightfully in a way that's going to leave you not feeling slimed. Here's my invitation to you and how you handle that situation. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think I handled that with my first son. My next three are not of dating age or situation yet,
Mm-hmm.
so we haven't had those conversations. But I think that's a brilliant point. My eldest son heard a version of this conversation over years and over many conversations.
Mm-hmm.
But in retrospect, I think to sit down with your son before he heads out on his first date and have that same exact conversation would be a powerful invitation, a powerful shift in his understanding. And the moment is precious. So, in the same way, I talk to my wife every day, but when we get away together or we have a date night, the conversation shifts. The preciousness of the moment that he's terrified to go take this girl out on a date too. And he's not sure of himself and he's not sure what to do, you can arm him and equip him in a way where he's going to hear it maybe more clearly than he'd hear it any other time. So that's a moment I look forward to taking advantage of when
Mm-hmm.
my son reaches that age of having his first date, my
Mm-hmm.
second son.
Mm-hmm. You know, and there's something that I felt when I was sitting with him in my garage. I felt for a moment, this is my son.
Hmm.
This is my
Hmm.
spiritual son.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm honoring him. I'm having a conversation. I'm wanting
Hmm.
genuinely to know him. I'm
Yeah.
offering him a drink. I'm just treating him like a man. And this is
Uh-huh.
something else I forgot to say. I said my daughter might be really uncomfortable with uh with you opening the door for her to the car and to the restaurant and wherever, you know. But will you open the car door for her? Will you open
Yeah, yeah.
the building door for her? Will you help her find her seat? Will you
Hmm.
treat her? And oh, I talked about the word precious. I said precious is something that may actually look common to everybody else, but
Uh-huh.
you, by choice, choose to elevate it as something that's of far greater value. And I said, would you commit to cherish my daughter tonight in the way that I cherish my daughter? He says, yes, I will do that. And I said, she may be really uncomfortable with you opening the door for her. She may disagree with you.
Mm.
Will you do
Well
it
done.
anyway? And he said, yes, I will. And I said, good. Right. So what a wonderful moment to see him, walking her out to his, his little, Honda Civic, opening the door for her and, watching through the window. She gets in the car. And as he's walking around the car, she's fixing her hair. I'm like, oh my God, I have a woman. I,
the
I have raised a woman.
the kind of rest of the story for me was I told one of these young men that, one day I'm going to hand my daughter's hand to a man,
Yeah.
and I want to hand it to them knowing that I did everything I could to protect and preserve her as God has appointed us as parents to do with our daughter, and me as a man in a particular way. And so I got to marry my daughter
Mm.
to one of those men. And I walked her down the aisle with that man standing at the altar. And the service stopped for a moment. And I turned to him and I reminded him of a conversation we had. And I said, one day I would hand her hand to another man. And that day is today. And you're that man. And just the fulfillment
Yeah.
of something we talked about and that God appointed me to, and that I had taken that seriously, and that He had taken me earnestly and seriously, and the fulfillment of that, the completion of that, was one of those father moments that's way up there.
I can see the emotion in your eyes
Yeah,
and
yeah.
in your smile because
Hmm.
that's fruit.
Hmm.
That's exactly the fruit that God intends for
Hmm.
us as sons to
Hmm.
be able to experience. That's really, really
Hmm.
good. And I got to see that. It was gorgeous.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
it was gorgeous. So, thanks, Brian. I hopefully that is going to be a tremendous encouragement to all of you. Keep that in your pocket. Pass
Hmm.
this conversation around. One of the things that you had mentioned, Brian, is that you were telling Kate that you and I were going to have a conversation about that, and she said, "Well, do you even think that's still timely? I mean, times have changed, and the world seems like a really different place, than whatever 5-10 years ago when you had that conversation with our daughter's suitors." And
Hmm.
you and I were in agreement. I think it's more needed now than ever. This is the ancient
Hmm.
path. This is a
Great.
man sitting down with another man and
Hmm.
fathering him. We've got
Hmm.
primary fathers, we've got secondary fathers, but God uses them all to father us. And
Hmm.
so anyway, I'm so appreciative of the opportunity to hear your story as a participant at
Yeah.
boot camp. When I sit in the back of the room and it's not my turn to teach, to be able to listen to that and see the fruit that it's born. Like, I wasn't thinking about this, 6-7 years ago, because my daughter was still sitting on my knee with a little bow in her hair, but it's all come
Yeah.
back around, and here it is. So let's pray for, would you mind praying for a father
Yeah.
who finds himself in that position right now to be fathered in this way? Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. Father, we're all unfinished men. We all have incomplete places. We all come to this season of our life, whether it's sprung on us 3 days before or whether we think and plan on it for years, as apprentices, as novices, as sons. And so we ask that you would father us in our fathering, that you would raise new courage, that you would bring clarity of mind, temerity of spirit, that you would invite us to have conversations with our daughters and our sons and our wives well before the 3 days notice that some of us get, that you would begin to prepare us, that you would raise courage, that you would raise a sense of protection and love through what we're doing in a way that men, young men, even in a 15-minute conversation, would have the course of their life altered, that we would find rising strength as men and as fathers, and that our daughters, our wives, and even our sons would feel a sense of protection, a sense of preparation, and a sense of your deep love, that they would know the love of their Heavenly Father through the actions of their Father. Father, we just ask you to surround those conversations. We ask to help us push through opposition or fear or misunderstanding we might feel in our own hearts or from the precious ones that we're trying to protect. Uh, Give us the courage, give us the energy to push through and to offer the Father in a way that's so uncommon in our world today and so desperately needed. Amen.
Amen. You know, this is just as much about our initiation as sons as it is about these young men.
Absolutely.
100%. 100%. So you'll trust your Father in heaven to guide you through that conversation, even if it feels awkward and clunky and you walk out of it not having had the same, positive experience. The fact that you engaged that young man, the fact that you decided to do that is going to bear fruit, which you will someday recognize. So don't go into it thinking you have to have it right. Go into it doing it because you know it's the right thing to do. That's the posture. That's the posture. So if you want to hear Brian share a little bit more about this and just about the relationship between men and women in general, you could actually join us at our upcoming boot camp, which is we're going to be hosting one in Blanco, Texas, January 27th through the 30th. It's a live boot camp. Brian gives a talk on the relationship of the masculine soul to the beauty, in particular in the feminine soul. So I think if you want to hear more about that, then you could come and join us for that. You can go to our website at www.beingsons.com and you'll see sign up for boot camp. But briefly, Brian, would you share what you do with Life Plan? I've actually participated. I've come to one of these Life Plans, benefited greatly, and it actually helped me understand that that stewarding this piece of God's heart called being sons is something that I am clearly called to. It's helped me say yes to this with a whole heart. And it's also helped me say no to a bunch of other things that I now know with clarity I'm not called to. And I did not have that level of clarity beforehand. So what is SummitTrek, and how might men be able to find you and spend more time with you in another arena?
There's business coaching, executive roundtable businesses that ironically happen in San Antonio and mostly in South Africa outside of San Antonio now. So let me set that aside for a moment. But the life plan that Jay's talking about is we believe that woven into the fabric of your creation is a unique identity. And God whispered that before you were born. It's the name on the white stone. God meant something when he met you. You're unique in all of creation. And most of us have fallen in line with someone else's idea about who we're supposed to be, maybe the culture's understanding of who we're supposed to be. But if you can take time, 48 hours, and excavate your life story, there's magic and clarity and understanding and wonder and revelation woven into the fabric of your story. So we spend time deconstructing your life and allowing God to speak through the reconstruction of that life story. We awaken desires. We help you get clear on who you are at a deep level that maybe transcends your current circumstance and understanding. We help you get clear, partnering with God, of what about an aspirational understanding of your life looks like. And we help you start to create a plan in order to move in the direction of that inspired identity. It's holy, it's precious. There's healing, there's forgiveness, there's overcoming of brokenness, there's finding redemptive perspectives. Like one friend told me, it's about a 10,000 hour counseling course that's crammed into about 48 hours, where God really shows up. SummitTrek, SUMMITTREK life plan. You can find all the information about that. There's usually 2 or 3 on our calendar. There's one in Fredericksburg, Texas, and some beach in California. We're doing one in October. So if you'll look at SummitTrek life plan, you'll be able to find what's coming up in terms of life plans.
And I'll have the link to that and to the events in the podcast notes. So, Brian, I'm so glad to have you as a friend. It's a gift. Thanks for allowing God to use you to help father me in this arena and many other arenas over the years.
Love doing life with you, friend. Thanks so much for having me.
Friends, this is Jay Heck and Brian Schroller. So thankful to share a few miles with you on the tried and true road to being sons.
Hour and a half, bro. Holy crikey. How did that happen?